That's good.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Haleh Isfandiari, the director of the Middle East program. It's a privilege to welcome Ambassador Samir Sumaida'ie, the Iraqi ambassador to Washington, to the Wilson Center. As you know, today is the 5th anniversary of the fall of Baghdad, and the ambassador is going to talk to us about the political and economic development that have taken place in Iraq, and will share with us his prediction for Iraq's future. Ambassador Sumaida'ie has served as ambassador of Iraq to the United States since April 2006. Prior to coming to Washington, he was Iraq's permanent representative to the United Nations since 2004. He was a member of the Governing Council, where he was chairman of the Media Committee. He played an integral role in the founding of the Iraq Telecoms and Media Commission and the Public Broadcasting Institution in Parliament. He also held position on the Security, Finance and Foreign Relations Committees. Before the removal of the Ba'athist regime, Ambassador Sumaida'ie was actively involved in opposition efforts in the UK. He was a founding member of the Association of Iraqi Democrats and the Democratic Party of Iraq. I think I'll stop here and let the ambassador speak. Given the recent development on the ground in Iraq, I'm sure there will be lots of questions. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you very much. I thank you and thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for giving me this opportunity on this, I hope, auspicious day. I think I might need some sunglasses here.
Yes.
with that light, but we'll see. At least you can see me, even if I don't see you. And thank you for gathering such an impressive audience, particularly on a day when these hearings continue and everybody is focused on them. We didn't know about the dates of the hearings when we fixed this date, but thank you all for coming. Probably all of you, or most of you, are up to date on a lot of the details in the Iraqi situation. And in this talk, I wanted to avoid simply describing the situation as it is now, because that's available from media reports, and now you have the hearings and many other sources. I wanted really to look at the Iraqi situation from a number of different angles, hopefully to shed some light on why things are the way they are, and create perhaps better insights and understanding of the situation, which hopefully would help us in looking at the future. This is, we stand here exactly at the end of 5 years since the fall of Saddam. And really it is a good time to stop and think and look at the next 5 years and what they are likely to bring, both for Iraq and the United States in relation to Iraq. We stand at crossroads. The United States is in the midst of a presidential election year. There are going to be changes. What will these changes mean for us? what will the situation in Iraq mean for the United States? These are very relevant questions. I'll start by saying that Iraq has surprised many people. And the reason it surprised many people is that simply they made wrong assumptions about it. People in this country tended to think in very simplistic terms about Iraq as a country ruled by a dictator but made up of Sunnis, Shia, and Kurds, perpetually at each other's throat, and are unlikely to reconcile. And if only we can resolve this tripartite relationship, we can bring peace to Iraq and get out of it. Iraq is not such a simple country, and it's not so clearly and permanently divided. Iraq is the product of millennia of social development. It's the oldest settled civilization on earth. And it has a very long history of plurality and integration. The communities, although there are definitely predominantly Sunni, predominantly Shia, and predominantly Kurd areas, but there's a great deal of overlap and intermingling. About 1/3 of all urban communities are mixed marriages. I don't know too many people who don't have somebody of the other sect in their family or extended family. There are more Kurds in Baghdad than in any city in Kurdistan. There are more than 600,000 Kurds in Baghdad. There are Sunni cities and towns in the south. There are Shia cities and towns in the north and the west. It is not such a tidy place where it can be parceled out and you can draw a single simple line across borders and then say everybody, run their own show. This solution might be dreamed up in this city by some people, even some senators, but it's not going to work in Iraq. Also, it goes against the grain of Iraqi society. We have had trouble between Sunni and Shia, definitely, and trouble during the during the time of Saddam between the government and the Kurds. But look at these situations a little more closely. You will find that although our neighbors deny the very existence of Kurds as a national entity, we celebrate them as our fellow compatriots, accept their Kurdish nationality, and not only accept it, we have all agreed that they deserve and must have the right to run their own affairs, teach Kurdish in their schools, and promote their culture and history within the context of Iraq. No neighbor comes close to the way we have dealt with our Kurdish compatriots. As the situation between Sunni and Shia, well, again, most people forget that Iraqi Shia are first Arabs and first Iraqis. We are proud to have Najaf as the center, if you like, the Vatican of Shia sect. And it is Shia in other countries who pay allegiance to the Shia of Iraq, not the other way around. And they proved it during the war with Iran by fighting for every inch of Iraqi territory. Now, the recent events, and this is where I come to this idea of surprises. The biggest surprise during the last year was that as soon as conditions permitted, the Sunnis moved against the extremists in their midst, represented by Al-Qaeda and some of the Saddamists, and drove them out of their communities. And the Shia, in response, have moved against the extremists in their midst. And this recent move by the government in Basra must be seen in that context. We suffered considerably, greatly, from extremism and terrorism. Both communities, all communities suffered. They target the innocent in order to whip up fear and whip up hatred. But they have failed. They have failed in starting a civil war in Iraq. They have failed in making this division permanent. And we often see Iraqi families threatened by terrorists in their neighborhood or extremists and have to leave their homes or communities, leaving the key to the front door with their neighbor of the opposite sex or a sect, or going to exile to Jordan or to Damascus and share homes there with people who are of a different sect. There is no animosity, and I say this from my personal experience. There is no animosity between Sunnis and Shia. There is no permanent, ingrained animosity. All Iraqi tribes have Sunnis and Shias, and as I said, all families have some component of the other thing. We have the president of Iraq now is a Kurd, and he's probably one of the most unifying figures in Iraqi politics. He represents Iraq well, and we are all proud of him. Iraq, fundamentally, under the surface, is a secular society. It has been overrun by a plague of extremism and by circumstances which forced Islamist political forces to the fore. But the fabric of society does not easily accept these things. I believe we ultimately will be proved to be like a non-stick pan, and these things will be transient and they will be removed. I am perhaps painting a picture which is too optimistic. I don't want to make light of the difficulties and the challenges. But in order to eliminate why we got to the mess that we've got to, I've got to look at the situation in Iraq from 2 or 3 different angles. First, and I'm not going to elaborate on this or go into detail, our American friends and liberators, when they came to Iraq, they did not really understand what they were getting themselves into. They did not really understand how to handle the Iraqi situation, and they made some mistakes, some serious mistakes. Some would even say blunders, and that we are still trying to recover from. In more recent times, especially since the beginning of 2007, they have changed their approach and have learned from the experience of the first 3-4 years, and now they are doing a lot better. But from the Iraqi perspective, let's project our minds back. Iraq was a progressive country, was up and coming in the 40s and 50s, was a pioneering company in the Middle East. It was leading on all the indicators, social, economic, cultural. We were leaders in every field. Then we took the wrong turn. Military rule degenerated into a dictatorship, which degenerated into an absolute dictatorship, and wars. At the end of this, we found the country was in tatters, really. The infrastructure totally destroyed, but more importantly, the human capital was severely damaged. In Iraq, it was always the educated middle class which led society and led the country and administered the country. As a result of this decimation, we accumulated, or an underclass grew in numbers and in poverty, to an extent that it became a predominant element in society. That, coupled with the migration and systematic intimidation of the middle class, resulted in the situation we had when the Americans came in. It so happened that most of this underclass were Shiite. It was because of the geographical areas, because of the policies adopted by the previous regime. And these are the ones which are, if you like, the main foot soldiers of the Al-Mahdi army. On the Sunni side, there was also a deprived class, which became the foot soldiers of Al-Qaeda and the insurgents. These uneducated, very desperately poor, unemployed people who had undergone 2 wars as soldiers and know very little apart from fighting, no skills, a lot of them involved in crime. When the lid was lifted and the grip of Saddam's security forces was loosened, they were let loose on the rest of the community. This resulted in the wave of violence and lawlessness at the beginning. It was not sectarian as such, but it had a sectarian flavor. And now we are beginning to grapple with this problem. There is realization that if the state is taken over, and there was danger, and there still is danger, that these elements inundate the state. They have inundated many ministries. Then we are all in peril. We have to restore the role of the middle class, bring back the educated, qualified, competent elements to lead our government departments and services institutions. And this is the struggle more, and of course that has reflections in the political arena. This underclass that I described is easily manipulated by the clergy and easily manipulated and motivated by Islamist political parties and political agendas. And that was reflected in the last election. But this has failed. And I believe there is realization in Iraq that as we move forward, there has to be more role and control by the educated, qualified, competent leaders, and we have plenty of them. Only that a lot of them have left the country for their own safety, and those who are in Iraq are under threat and are marginalized. Now, this is an angle that is not often talked about in the media or in newspapers, but it is an important angle to help us understand why things have gone out of control and how to deal with them. Superimposed on this, as I said before, the errors made by the United States and the active interference by our neighbors, or at least some of them. Vacuum doesn't work in politics as in nature. There's always something that tries to fill that vacuum, and vacuum of power also is not stable. So when Saddam was removed, Iraq was not totally under control. It gave an opportunity, an incentive for many people to step in. And as you know, Al-Qaeda and some of our neighbors wanted to ensure at least that their interests, as they saw them, are protected. And as a result, we have the complexities of our own internal situation, and on top of that, we have the interference of our neighbors. But Iraqis, if anything, they are resilient. They are very, very resilient. They are the survivors of centuries of wars and difficulties, and they will survive this as they survived before, and they come up rather like the phoenix. And I have no doubt at all that they will come up again. After I came to Washington, I met Jerry Bremer, with whom I worked when I was member of the Governing Council. And I was always known as the optimist in the Governing Council. He asked me, Samir, are you still optimistic? I said yes, but the time scale has shifted. It is true that perhaps when we first went back to Iraq, we had unrealistic expectations. We thought that we can fix the country in a short period of time. But when the scale of the devastation became clear, it also became, and also, as I said, it was exasperated by taking the wrong turn at every opportunity, at least in the first year, by our American friends, that it became clear that we were not going to get out of this situation very quickly. Now, what can the Americans do now? You probably have heard at least part of the testimony by this incredibly capable pair of people who are still talking, probably as I am talking now, in Congress. General Petraeus, for whom I have a great respect and regard, and same with Ambassador Crocker. General Petraeus has brought with him an intellectual capacity to understand complexity and deal with the situation as it should be dealt with. And I think his application of counterinsurgency principles worked and was as important a factor as the increase in the numbers of troops. And that gave us Iraqis the opportunity to start turning things around. and things are being turned around. So he and the quiet, intelligent diplomacy of Ambassador Croker are working at last to our advantage. I think they are doing a great service for the American people. But what do we want them to do? The Americans, as Anthony Kurtzman said in a recent paper, have influence but do not have control. I would say they have a lot of influence. Nobody can help having a lot of influence with 160,000 troops on the ground. That it goes without saying. But they also they have influence because it's not only the troops. They are fully engaged in the work of all Iraqi government departments and activities, and they can persuade, and they can cajole, and they can nudge, and they can push, and they do produce results when they push in the right direction. And one of the things that they must help us do is to reform the security forces, make them professional, weed out the criminal elements, weed out those who have their allegiance not to the law but to their own militias outside, and improve their leadership structure. Until recently, the Americans have been obsessed by numbers. We have trained so many thousand police. We have added so many thousand soldiers. Numbers don't work. Not if it's the wrong people. What's the use of 300,000 police if half of them are criminals or half of them are not really working for the government or controllable by the government? It's counterproductive. I was briefly Minister of Interior in 2004, and I knew immediately that I needed at that time to get rid of at least 20,000 people. A simple check of criminal record produced 5,000 names with a criminal record. Now, there's no use spending money and resources and time training criminals to be police because their motivation is just not the right motivation. We had some police who were hiring their uniforms and police cars on a daily basis. We have horrific stories. So the point I'm making here is quality before quantity. Again, I come back to the style of discourse we have with some of our American friends. It's so death by PowerPoint. It's endless, and it's numbers. Nobody asks the question, what do these numbers mean? Who are these people? How are we dealing with the issues of cohesion, leadership, accountability, preventing corruption? All these issues are and must be very important. So coming back to what the Americans can do, they can do better, is to help us put in filters, help us use technology in order to aid the filtration process and the registration of personnel. And they can also act on the political scene as a moderating influence. There are obviously some political players who put forward maximalist demands, and it helps for somebody from outside the Iraqi club, if you like, and in this case it's the United States and also the United Nations up to a point, to tell those, and everybody does that at one point or another, you have to moderate your demands. I'm oversimplifying here, but this process has been going on, and the Americans are showing a great deal of effectiveness in this field. What of the future? Progress, certainly. We were on a downward spiral a year and a half ago. I would argue that now we are on an upward spiral. Perhaps not very steep, but we're definitely on an upward spiral. There's going to be progress, halting, punctuated by setbacks, but there's going to be progress. And what's going to deliver us finally is two things. The American will to see this process through. I believe eventually that will be there, irrespective of who wins the presidential election at the end of this year. And the underlying nature of the Iraqi people. That's the biggest asset we have. We Iraqis want to stay united. Iraqis will reject any notion of subdividing the country on sectarian basis. Iraqis will reconcile. They are doing so ahead of the government. The government is made up of political parties who are jockeying for position and power. Communities have a greater stake in reconciling, I would say, than the political parties, and they are showing this. We need to start to shift the burden, or some of the burden. We have to address our Arab brothers and tell them to engage, to be with us. If they are afraid of the growing influence of Iran in Iraq, well, the best way to stem it is to be with us and not to isolate the Iraqi government and push it into the lap of Iran. We have been disappointed by the attitudes of some of our Arab brothers. We need more support and even guidance from our neighbors. But what we do not need is interference. What we do not need is a whole stream of suicide bombers on one side, or detonators and roadside bombs across our borders. We do not need these. But those who persist on keeping those streams flowing will not stop us. But at the end, we will know who is our friend and who is our foe. In short, in 5 years' time, I believe we will be well on our way to recovery. We will not have recovered completely. Our institutions will not have been fully reconstituted, but we will be well on the way of recovery, and we will have confounded the pundits who have thought of Iraq simply in terms of three irreconcilable communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor now to questions. Could I ask you to identify yourself? Mr. Ambassador, I'll put the first question to you. We know that as we are speaking, earlier this morning, Iraq, Baghdad time, there was still fighting going on in Sadr city between the Mahdi army and the American and Iraqi army. Would the Iraqi army would have been able to defeat the Mahdi army without the help of the American helicopter presence and fighting in the ground?
Well, thank you. I don't think we should be talking in terms of the government defeating Al-Mahdi army. It's not a set peace battle with a clear front line and, one army defeats the other army. We must defeat the idea of the Mahdi army. We must defeat the idea that people exercise power through militias, want to influence politics through armed gangs. This idea, which found currency because of the difficulties we had and the vacuum we had, must be changed. And the Prime Minister has been single-mindedly determined to rid the country of these militias. Now he's been accused of doing this for his own political agenda. One of the things that is very much to his credit is that his political party, does not have a militia. Well, that's good. At least he doesn't have an interest in keeping militias. But unless we get rid of the idea of having militias and having one foot in the political process and another foot in the world of being, having militias and being a warlord, we cannot fix the country. If somebody might be right in saying perhaps the Prime Minister should not have moved at this time, but nobody should criticize the government for moving against the Mahdi army because of moving against the Mahdi army. The Mahdi army will be defeated ultimately, but in increments, in steps. It will be weakened. I remember when I was Minister of Interior, Al-Mahdi army tried to control Najaf and tried to control the shrine of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They were defeated, but defeated by a combination of military action, it was very bloody, and the actions of the residents of Najaf themselves. The Najafis did not want their shrines to be controlled by a militia. So when we get people to reject this idea, and at the same time we extend the opportunity for young people to have jobs, and rather than carrying a Kalashnikov and receiving $100 or $200 a month, which come from somewhere, if we manage to cut off that stream of funding and create a different stream of funding, legitimate, productive, and constructive, and that's happening. It's a gradual process, but I believe we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. David, please just wait for the mic. Thank you.
Dave Ottaway, I'm a senior scholar here at the Center. Since we're talking about militia, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Sunni militia that the Americans have, in fact, created and financing and supporting and have tried to have integrated into the regular military, but the government has refused. What do you see the fate and future of these Sunni militia in Anbar province and elsewhere is?
Thank you. There is no future for any militia in Iraq. These phenomena took place because of certain transient circumstances. Now, as we know, and let us remind ourselves, in Al-Anbar, about a year and a half ago, it was under the control of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda indeed were parading their forces through the high street of the main city, Ramadi, they were visible to the Americans. And the Americans could not do anything about it. And all our police forces up and down the Euphrates were totally destroyed, and their centers destroyed by Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was the government. It was in charge of that territory. And it took a few brave souls to start a popular uprising against Al-Qaeda. They received no arms from anybody. They received no money from anybody. But they moved against Al-Qaeda. The only thing they did, they went to the Americans and they said, please let us do it. Don't interfere. Don't get in our way. And they did it. And when the Americans started to see results, they backed them up. They did not give them arms, because these people are armed. These are tribal people. Everybody has a Kalashnikov. They have a Kalashnikov before they have a pair of shoes. They turned the situation around completely. Now, I was in Iraq in January, and I went up to Ramadi and met Sheikh Ahmed Abu Risha after his brother Abdul Sattar Abu Risha was assassinated by Al-Qaeda. They got him. And he was one of the first group that moved against them. He said to me very clearly, we want to work within the framework of the state. We don't want to have a militia. We don't want to have our sons carrying weapons outside the framework of the state. But we need to keep the terrorists out. We need to keep the security for our community. As soon as the state wants to take over, our sons will volunteer into whatever force they are required to volunteer into. You cannot really argue with that line. As a result of this, and the very wise support the Americans gave them, the money being spent on them, as General Petraeus said yesterday, is a fraction of the cost of the vehicles that would have been lost, and they were being lost on a monthly basis in Al-Anbar as a result of attacks by the insurgents and Al-Qaeda, not to speak of the losses in life and limb. So there is no intention, at least by the people themselves, of forming a militia. These young men who have bravely stood up and were ready to be counted, some of them will be absorbed and have been absorbed in the security forces. Some will be hopefully found jobs in other activities.
Michael, and then Michael, please wait for the mic. Yeah.
I'm Michael Adler from the Wilson Center. I want to ask you about the influence of Iran. And can Iran actually turn up the heat or turn down the heat pretty much at will? And were they as responsible as was reported in helping end a recent round of fighting?
Yeah, the situation with Iran is really quite complex. First of all, Iran has a lot of scores to settle with the United States. And the history of the relationship is well known to everybody. And I dare say they would be quite happy to keep the United States in an uncomfortable situation in Iraq. However, this is hurting us, and we keep telling them so. And they tell us and assure us on every occasion, in every encounter, that they want to support security in Iraq, and they want to help us, and really we then observe different things happening in reality. So this tension continues. at the end of the day, we have to rely on our ability on a number of things, but one of them is our ability to protect ourselves by better controls at the border, better intelligence within the country, identifying operatives, taking them out, and so on and so forth. And that capacity has been increasing and has become much more effective than it used to be. To the extent that I understand the Iranians withdrew a lot of their operatives because they were being eliminated. Now, that's not really a solution. That takes us to the next point, which is trying to get a dialogue going between the United States and Iran. You know, you guys can go and fight it out somewhere else, but don't fight it out here, please. That's effectively the message that's being put out by Iraqi diplomacy. By trying to get Iranians and American representatives to talk about security in Iraq specifically, not to talk about the nuclear issue or about Hamas or about Hezbollah or any other, or the history of this troubled relationship. Just talk about Iraq. And if some kind of understanding or accommodation is reached, that would benefit us. That would give us a reprieve, would allow us to then get on with the patching up of our wounds and building up of our institutions under less stress. Sorry, did you want to follow up on?
Yeah, Michael, you had a follow-up? A quick follow-up.
In the talks where you're trying to settle the security issues, do the other issues overlap or intercede, or
no, we have made it. No, we made it clear, and we made it a rule, in fact, in these encounters, not to put on the agenda any other issue, not related to Iraq.
Yes, please.
I'm Caroline Bledsoe, a scholar here at the Wilson Center. Thank you very much. I thought this was a wonderful talk. I really appreciate the first two-thirds of it.
Well, I'm sorry about the last third.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. I think that's an extremely important message that's often lost on the diplomatic community, that people are not tribes over there that are locked into fixed entities that are at war with each other and so on. And it's really hard to get that message through, and I'm afraid to get lost. But the main thing I think you're arguing for is another vision which could be equally problematic, which is to see people as fixed entities. And I hope you can clarify this for us. What you envision, actually, say the U.S. to help you do, is to weed out individuals that are causing problems, because, as you know, and you hinted in your talk, that sometimes people get into situations and they become other kinds of people because of the situation, because of the structure. And so if you ask the United States to come in and help you profile people and weed out certain people or whatever, I don't understand what you mean by this next phase.
Oh, right. Okay, maybe I did not explain it carefully. We starting, for example, with the security forces, we built up a formidable number of police and military in terms of actually numbers. The United States helped us through advisors and through procurement and through logistical system help. In fact, one of my advisors when I was Minister of Interior is sitting just here. He continues to be interested. This help is crucial, not least because the United States disbanded our security apparatus that existed during Saddam regime. not all the security apparatus was detrimental to society. For example, the police had considerable skills in combating drug smuggling, organized crime, counter-espionage, a lot of issues that were not part of the instruments of dictatorship, but are necessary to protect society. Counter-smuggling, all these things. There was a capacity. All that was just vanished. And now we have to build something. And the way they went about it, well, go into the streets and recruit people. 30,000 in 30 days, that was the slogan. 60,000 in 60 days. And it was totally chaotic and indiscriminate. Now, okay, we had all these people in, and now we have to weed them out. We have to get the wrong people out. And what I was trying to say is that those political entities who managed in those chaotic days to get all their people in, irrespective of whether they were suitable or not suitable, we have to persuade them that it's not ultimately in their interest, nor is it, and certainly not in the interest of the country, to keep that state of affairs. Because what we have is a security apparatus that is not trusted by the people. And when the people don't trust their police, they're not going to go to the police with information. And and when the government wants to crack down, as happened in Basra, we find that it is less than a perfect instrument, even the army. So it's in everybody's interest to reach a political understanding on this, and to actually also put in the tools and the wherewithal of doing the job. So we have a political and, if you like, a technical side to this issue. The Americans can help us with both. The Americans can help us talk through and arrive at the right understanding politically by gentle persuasion, sometimes not so gentle, but gentle persuasion, and at the same time make it facilitate this process. This process is crucial for the stabilization of the country. I cannot overemphasize how important it is, but it is problematic. It's not easy to do when you need to expel. Now we have a whole body of security people called the Facilities Protection something or another. And these were people who were recruited to protect the electricity, the oil infrastructure, but they were recruited by different ministries. And they became like sort of mini militias for each minister. So every minister recruited the people that he likes, and then they were inflated. I was told about a school with a certain number of kids in it who had more facilities protection staff than the pupils. It's ridiculous. So we have to reform. But reforming means turning this out of jobs and at least keeping the people that are the right people to keep, not the people who have their cousins high up in the ministry. This reform has a technical, administrative side to it, and has also a political side to it. And we've got to push that through. Our American friends can help us. Have I made myself a little more clear? Thank you.
We have room for 3 more questions, if it's okay with you, and I'm going to take all 3 together. Just quick questions, please. Yes, just wait for the microphone, please.
Colonel Datta, Foreign Policy Association. Your Excellency. It was very enlightening to hear you this morning.
Thank you.
I would like you to comment on these 2 points. One is the headline in the Washington Post that the security in Iraq is fragile. Does that mean the strategic or tactical or in any form? Second, remarks of Joe Biden, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, that the present government of Mr. Maliki has got sectarian overtone in its governance.
Okay, thank you. Question here. Yes. Yes.
Salwa Al-Gailani from the Iraq Foundation. Ambassador, you talked about the Arab countries and how they can help Iraq. As you know, a stable democratic Iraq is a threat to many of these regimes. So, and some of these regimes are allies of the United States. So in your opinion, how can we, influence these countries to help Iraq, and that a stable Iraq is not a threat, to their countries? On the contrary, it's something that they could follow, an experience that they could follow to, advance their countries.
Thank you.
We'll take the last question. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. My question is more on the general picture of Iraq. As an Iraqi born and raised in Baghdad, the issue of sectarianism was almost invisible to us as citizens living there. Since the 2003 invasion, there has been capitalizing, obviously, on many layers and on the society. Do you see Iraq being another Lebanon? And also, what are your vision for how can we, as Iraqis, fight sectarianism, as many Iraqis are rejecting it as a result of what we've seen the last 5 years? Thank you.
Thank you. These are all important questions. First, General, yes, our progress and our security is still fragile. We have not stabilized the country to the extent that we feel we have a cushion to rely upon. If, God forbid, another major shrine is blown up by Al-Qaeda or by some extremist group, all bets are off, because the extremists then will start to drive the agenda. And that's why we have to be very careful. Joe Biden's remark about the sectarian overtone, Iraq should be thought of as a country which is really in a very difficult straits, rather like a sick person. It has to, after a surgical operation, there's a period at which you might keep this person in intensive care. And there's no use going into the intensive care ward and saying, well, you look pale today. Well, yeah, yes. We exhibit many symptoms of the sickness, and we have multiple sicknesses. But the question you should be asking the patient and the doctor is that, can this patient recover? Is this terminal? Is the patient's constitution intact that he can get over this? I believe it is. I'm not making claims that we don't have any such problems. We have a lot of problems. But these problems will not impact our ability to survive them. Salwa, yes, thank you for your question. Our Arab neighbors, some of them might feel threatened by a democratic Iraq, but they should feel much more threatened by a country which is totally in the grip of terrorists. a disintegrated Iraq, a country where a failed state at their border. That must and surely be much more of a threat to them. And if they are, again, if they are worried about the influence of Iran growing in Iraq, the best thing is to provide the antidote. Come in and be with us. Iraqis have never accepted the domination of anybody before, the Iranian or the Turks or anybody else, and they will not now. But it would help if our Arab brothers show some solidarity. As to Asil's question, thank you, Asil. Yes, there is a danger of the Lebanization of Iraqi politics. I remember in January 2004, I went to a conference and met the late Rafiq al-Hariri, the Prime Minister of Iran, who was out of Lebanon, I beg your pardon, who was assassinated a while after. And we had a long chat, and I remember distinctly what he told me. He said, Samir, go back and tell your colleagues not to get into sectarian politics. It's easy to get into, but impossible to get out of. And I transmitted his message. He was so right. It's easy to get into sectarian politics. It's very, very difficult to get out of it. And we have to really all be conscious of this. And I think most Iraqis are conscious of it. And we sort of, because of the pressures the severe pressures that we were under, and the activities of the Al-Qaeda, who were determined to create a civil war, and so on, we came to the brink, but we managed to pull back. And I think Iraqis will stay away from, I cannot say they will stay away from sectarian politics. This will be with us for a while. But crucially, our constitution, the constitution that was put together, lays the foundation of non-sectarian politics. And even the fact that in the first, that we have now, for example, a presidential council made up of a president and two deputy president who happen to be one Sunni, one Shia. That's not by accident or coincidence. The crafters of the Constitution were careful to make that limited only to the first term. Because we are in transition, because the communities are still feeling vulnerable and feeling confidence is not up to where it should be. So I believe that with our Constitution and with the fundamental nature of our society, we have a good chance of averting the Lebanization of Iraq.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, and we hope to welcome you again on the 6th anniversary of the Vala Saddam with
in a
some of your
situation.
some of your
some people might remind me of what I said.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. This was really all the time that I chaired meetings I did through the times. Nobody left, although we passed one of them, everybody sat on this. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. No, you can have one of these pens.
Oh,
yeah. Please.
Thank you. Yes, but
yeah. Thank you.
No,
Can have yeah. Thank you.
will there be anything?
Sorry. Yes, we probably will put it on our website. It won't be a transcript. Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, are you referring to the Syrians? Al-Qaeda is being referred to like that.
And there are also, in this case, there are also staff.
When he said he's going to delay the trip, I said I have to come to him.
Yes, okay,
Probably in a month.
it's
أنا أمر لك إن شاء الله خابر إن شاء الله أمر لك. I'll call you. إن شاء الله. هلا.
These two things together, these are printed in together, so this one is actually custom care. No, my friend there was working on this Islamic guy trying to save his plumber 18 months ago. And his family's been there since